And now, an on-the-record special, Christians under attack.
The ISIS Islamic terrorist group targeting and killing Christians and religious minorities.
They're killing Christians,
right.
And if you and threaten you, we're going to kill you if you don't get out of there to the Christians. They're beheading children, I understand.
We saw the same thing in the Sudan. We saw the same thing in Kosovo.
You're having people on the ground slaughtering Christians.
Christians should be praying for them, and the world should be denouncing these acts of terrorism and genocide.
It's around the world, from Iraq to Iran to Sudan to North Korea and beyond. Christians are being persecuted. And former Senator Rick Santorum joins us. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you very much, Greta.
These people are being persecuted because of their thoughts, their beliefs. Is this growing?
Unfortunately, it is. I mean, this is a problem with, it's really, let's pin it where it is. This is radical Islam. And radical Islam is intolerant of any dissent, including other Muslims. I mean, one of the things that is also pointed out is that moderate Muslims are also suffering under this Sharia compliance that is driving Christians out of radical areas, as well as just the violence that is being perpetrated on them, burning of churches, killing of clergy, and now you're seeing masses of people.
Is it, does the Quran have tolerance for other beliefs? Because you say it's radical Islam. Does the Quran itself allow for diversity of thought and faith?
The Quran is a mixed bag, and there are verses in the Quran that the radicals hold on to and use that to justify their activities, and then there are other verses in the Quran that so-called moderate Muslims, I would say so-called, but moderate Muslims hold on to and say there is a lot of ability to live with others and tolerate and have tolerance. So the Quran is sort of whatever you want to justify. There's verses in there for both, and that creates the problem.
So how do we stop this? Because we see what's going on in Iraq. I mean, where people are literally convert or be murdered. So what should the United States do or not do?
Well, this is something that's been a problem with Islam for a long, long time, and now these radicals are seizing upon, really, when I say a long time, I mean thousands of years ago. I mean over 1,000, not thousands, over 1,000 years ago. I mean, this was the standard, and you have folks who are living in the the 8th century, the 9th century, and trying to resurrect that, period of time.
What do we do?
Look, I've said this from Greta, I've been on your show many, many times. You have to confront it. You can't ignore it. You can't say because we killed one person, Osama bin Laden, that it's gone. When you see a rise of it, and have seen a constant rise of it in countries all over the world, even Muslims in that region of the world, take al-Sisi in Egypt, recognize the threat that it is to Muslims generally.
So what do we do?
Well, what is al-Sisi doing? He's confronting it. I mean, he's wiping it out.
So what do we do?
Well, I think what we have to do is engage with those who want to partner with us and do what is necessary to eliminate those threats, ISIS being first and foremost right now in Iraq. And we have to begin to partner with, hopefully, the new prime minister there to engage in a way that's constructive to eliminate this threat.
Do you see us doing that?
I don't see any leadership being provided by this president. I think this president is content to take a step back, to let others. I mean, here we are where there's a war going on in the Middle East with Hamas and Israel, and the Egyptians are setting up the peace talks. I mean, who would have conceived that, as 5 or 6 years ago? But that's where we are. We have retreated from world leadership, and as a result of that, we have no say in the future of those countries right now.
You mentioned Israel. You're headed there.
I am.
Why?
To show solidarity to the Israelis. I mean, we've seen just reports just in the last few days. I mean, that this administration is doing everything they can to try to force Israel into a very bad deal, to a ceasefire, not to be able to defend themselves, to stop these missiles from coming, to stop the tunnels from being used to bring terrorists into the country. And we need to stand up and say that the American public, maybe not this administration, but that the American public supports Israel, and we're going to be there to make that statement.
Senator, nice to see you. Have a good trip.
Thank you.
And right now, the war on Christians is most evident and terrifying in Iraq. ISIS militants killing Christians who will not convert to Islam. A live report from Iraq is next. ISIS issuing their ultimatum to Christians in Iraq: convert to Islam, pay a fine, or face death by the sword. That means beheading. Fox News correspondent Greg Palkot just spoke with the Archbishop of Erbil, Iraq, and Greg joins us live from Erbil. Greg.
Warda of the Chaldean Catholic Church is a man with his hands full. His church runs 25 refugee centers in Erbil alone, and so he sees and hears firsthand the horrors that are perpetrated on Christians by ISIS in Iraq. Here are a few of the observations he shared with me, a warning they are not too hopeful.
Practically speaking, realistically speaking, is the end of the Christianity. I have to say. We will stay, yes, there would be Christians staying, but we would be like an article in a history book. Most of them would like to go back to prepare their papers and leave the country. Leave the country. Others, no way. Some people would ask us, do you like to stay? And I usually turn the question and ask them, do you like us to stay? It's not. It's not that we don't like to stay, but it depends on you if you like me to stay.
A key point that Warda made to me is this: it is not just the hundreds or thousands of ISIS militants causing horrors against the Christians. It is the anti-Christian fever that is incited in many, many more in Iraq. It could be neighbors of the Christians who are also capable of robbing and attacking, and that is why he says many, many of these people do not want to go back home. Greta.
Greg, thank you. And a short time ago, the United Nations acting unanimously endorsing a resolution calling for sanctions against those who finance or give military support to ISIS. So that's the UN. But what should the Obama administration be doing to help Christians around the world? Joining us, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North and former UN Ambassador John Bolton. Good evening, both of you. First to you, Colonel North, with the number of ISIS growing, and it's terrific that we're giving humanitarian aid, but if they're growing in number and gaining ground and they have a ton of money, are we going to be giving humanitarian aid forever? Don't we have to get ISIS?
Well, first of all, that United Nations resolution that says other countries don't have to aid ISIS. ISIS has got their own. It's the wealthiest terrorist organization on the planet, and they generate about $1 million in revenue a day from the black market. The only way to deal with ISIS isn't by dropping supplies and water and food to humanitarian relief efforts. We've got to start dropping bombs on ISIS. And we've got to do that at their command and control nodes, their logistics support centers, the places where they gather, and we know where they are. I mean, one of the good things that we've got in our intelligence services is the ability to detect that. And it can't just be in Iraq. It also has to be in Syria.
Ambassador, you've told us that President Obama doesn't understand religion or religious fanaticism. That's what you told us. And I'm curious, it's not just ISIS in Iraq. I mean, we've got Boko Haram doing the most unthinkable thing with schoolgirls that just recently killed 100 people in the last few days, slit their throats while they're saying God is great. I mean, it is many places. What are we supposed to do?
Well,
if we're supposed to do anything.
I think the president's really got to confront the reality that we see ISIS perpetrating in Syria and Iraq and these other extremists around the world. I think the president suffers from a fundamental defect shared by many in American academia and on the political side, that he doesn't see that these religious fanaticisms can arise from something other than poverty, that it's not an economically based problem. It's an ideological problem. We're in an ideological struggle against a radicalized form of Islam. And I think in the case of ISIS, the one that confronts us immediately, we need a presidential decision that the United States has to lead a coalition to destroy ISIS. We cannot let it hold territory, because it's only a short matter of time before ISIS attacks not Christians and Yazidis in Iraq, but in the United States.
But in looking at the whole sort of persecution of Christians that we've been looking at here on the record for the last few nights, is there any indication, either one of you, that it is declining, or is this growing?
No, quite the contrary. It's obviously growing. And you wonder what it will take to get the president to understand this. We now have not just a resolution, we have 2 UN UN Secretary General's special representatives issuing a statement today saying 1,500 Christians and Yazidis have been sold into sexual slavery in Iraq. So I wonder what the president is going to do to tell us that this is barbarianism in action.
You know, Colonel, you said something the other night that I thought was chilling when we were talking about, you know, what the terrible things that happened in the 30s and the 40s in the Holocaust, is that it was stunning to me when you said, you know, a lot of people say they didn't know about it, and you say that you point out that we do now know about this.
Can't deny
it puts us in a completely different situation.
Well, it does. The moral responsibility that I have is to my children and my grandchildren. And I don't want to have to turn to my children and try to pretend we didn't know. This is up on the internet. It's all over the place. They revel in their culture of death. There's not been something like this in your lifetime and mine. Perhaps in Genghis Khan, but not in our lifetimes. And our responsibility is to hold our government accountable, not just to a single humanitarian disaster of Yazidis and Christians in Iraq, but a global attack on not just Christianity, a global attack on Jews. Think about it. The only place in the Middle East today where a Christian is safe is Israel.
Well, there are Muslims that are even being persecuted in Sudan. I mean, it's not.
Well,
I mean,
they're equal opportunity killers, and that's part of the problem. I think is that it's such a pervasive threat that people don't want to see it in its totality. So if you look at it country by country, it doesn't look like we have a responsibility. But I think we do for our own safety's sake, if nothing else.
Well, if the numbers were declining, it would be easier. I mean, it's like the humanitarian thing is really tough to look at. I mean, the beheadings and the viciousness of people. I've seen people starving to death, eating bugs and leaves. I mean, it's very tough, but the problem is it's growing.
Well, this refugee crisis in particular is not over. Maybe not on Mount Sinjar, but you still have hundreds of thousands of people not in their homes. And the notion that we can just turn away from it, I think, violates the responsibility we have in Iraq in particular, given what we've done and what we tried to do for that country. And yet the president doesn't seem to want to address it.
Gentlemen,
it's not too late to reach out to the disaffected Sunni seculars in Anbar province. I spent an awful lot of time broadcasting with you from there, and they're still our friends. They're just afraid that we're going to bug out on them again.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. And even here in the United States, Christians are not under physical attack, but some of their rights are being violated. A complaint to the Navy, and suddenly Bibles are removed from military hotels. And then there's football players told not to pray. And Reverend Michael Faulkner joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta.
Without any doubt, it's a lot better than it is in Nigeria and Sudan and in Syria and Iran. But
for the time being. Because if we don't bring this into check, if we don't do exactly what the colonel and what the ambassador was saying, we are going to find this right on our doorstep. And the time to do something about it is right now.
All right. That's the imported terrorism from other places, but in terms of coming here in the United States. But we're also seeing instances where a lot of Christians are upset because, for instance, recently the Navy had Bible. They were told that they had Bibles in these military hotels, and all of a sudden they took them out. Now they're back in again, but that there's been a lot of sort of pressure domestically against Christians. A lot of them are very upset.
Right. Well, the thing is, Christians are easy targets. We're easy targets because as a religious group, I mean, you know, we understand that our belief system tells us that we will be persecuted. But at the same time, we have to understand that this whole era of political correctness has grown and expanded to the point where now it's okay to have religious freedom for any other religion other than Christianity, and we're seeing that right here in the United States.
You know, I think people forget the First Amendment includes freedom of religion, freedom to your thoughts, and I guess there are some people who probably think that when you talk about sort of some of the things that are happening to Christians here look rather tame compared to what's happening in these other countries. I mean, completely. I mean, we're not killing people because of their thoughts here, but nonetheless, it's stomping all over their rights when you do things like that.
Yeah, and you know, Greta, you know, going back to the Bible incident, you know, those people who had the Bibles removed from the naval dormitories and naval lodgings, they don't know that the first two Bibles published in the United States of America were published by the Congress of the United States.
Let me go to this topic about this school. Apparently, there's a humanist organization that wrote to a public school system because they were upset because the public school athletes were praying.
Well, listen, I was an athlete in high school and college, and I can tell you, you want your athletes praying. You want them praying because it creates a moral fiber, a basis upon which they can build and upon which these young men can grow and develop. And it's not forced. You see, that's the thing that people need to understand. This is not forced. This is a choice. And so these young people are being given a choice, an option about following a moral frame of reference.
And I guess if you tell them they can't do that, then you're forcing them not to, and you're stepping on their right, their constitutional right to do it.
Absolutely. Where do we get off with this? I don't understand where this came from, but I do know where it's going to go. I do know that if we do not bring this back into check, if we do not say, listen, Christianity or any other religion is okay to observe that in those areas as long as it's not forced and coerced.
Reverend, nice to see you, sir. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, Greta. Thank you.
And an American pastor in prison in Iran. For one reason, he is a Christian, but it gets so much worse. Now there are ISIS prisoners in that same prison, and they want to kill him. Now his young children making a heart-wrenching plea for President Obama's help. That's next, as our on-the-record special, Christians Under Attack, continues.
I don't want him to miss another birthday or Christmas or Father's Day. Please help bring him home. Why does our daddy need to be in prison for loving Jesus?
An emotional plea to President Obama from the young children of an American pastor imprisoned in Iran just for being Christian. Pastor Saeed Abedini now serving his second year of an 8-year sentence. And now that news that ISIS is in the prison is very bad news for him. Joining us, the pastor's wife, Negma Abedini, and Jay Sekulow from the American Center for Law and Justice. Good evening to both of you. Negma, what is it that you know about ISIS in that prison?
Well, Saeed was able to convey to his mom when she visited on Wednesday that there is ISIS, they're of Iranian descent that had joined ISIS that are in the prison now and have threatened him because he's a Christian, but he's a Christian convert, so he's converted from Islam, and also that you know, because he's a dual Iranian American citizen. But it's been pretty intense in that prison. It's already a tense prison, but now there's additional threats, and we're really concerned about his well-being.
Jay, is it true that he is in prison for his beliefs? Is that why the Iranians have him?
That's absolutely correct, Greta. We've actually seen the documents. We've talked to the Iranian lawyers, and he's in prison because of his faith. They'll say, by the way, it's for national security reasons. But under the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, a national security reason would be someone of a different faith. But you've got to take it, as you've been reporting so well tonight, this evening. The fact of the matter is, a group like ISIS, which sole intent is destruction, the Iranians are so concerned about ISIS, they've arrested ISIS agents with Iranian descent and put them in this prison. But he is in jail for one reason and one reason only, and that is because he is a Christian. There are no other real charges. They say national security because of his faith. So they don't even deny it, and that, in fact, is been out there and proven. But the reality is that he's facing right now the most dangerous situation imaginable. Think about what we've seen on your broadcasts and others with ISIS out in towns and cities. Now imagine them in a confined area of a prison. These are not people that are afraid of being disciplined or afraid of going to jail. They target a man in jail because of his faith.
Negma, have you been able to talk to your husband at all in the last several months? And is the United States able to help you in any way? Can they do anything? I mean, we don't have a relationship with Iran, but is there anything they can do for you?
Well, I haven't had any, the Iranian government hasn't allowed any contact since pretty much around before his sentence in early 2013. His parents, Saeed's parents, get to see him in prison. That's where I get my updates. I think our government, as the best place we've been at with the Iranian government, we're talking about different issues, and I think there is something. That's why my kids made the video. They're pleading with President Obama to take action, to just bring him home, and not just mention him to the Iranian government, but take action in bringing him home.
Thank you to you both, and to the viewers. That full video is on GretaWired.com of the children asking the president to help. Thank you both. And from Iran to Iraq to Sudan, Christians fleeing to mountaintops, hiding in caves, even starving to escape persecution. Reverend Franklin Graham takes you to the front lines of the war on Christians. You can take ISIS forcing thousands and thousands of Iraqi Christians to run for their lives. But it's not just Iraq. Christians in Sudan also know the terror of religious persecution, and we visited the Sudanese refugees along with Reverend Franklin Graham in 2012.
And they're killing them.
President Bashir of Sudan is bombing their homes, so they're leaving their homes, walking for days. They have malnutrition. You can see this poor child. You can see with their skin and her face. But this is not unusual. The Sudanese government launching airstrikes, murdering Christians and Muslims in the Nuba Mountains. They're hiding out in caves because the planes overhead will come in and they run the risk that they're going to be bombed again. Homes, schools, churches, all bombed. Reverend Graham and I visiting the center of it all.
And you can see the mounds of dirt out here. Those are fresh graves of people that died right here where we're standing.
As you can see, it is absolutely devastating what's happening to the people of this country. But it's not just Sudan. Millions of Syrians caught in the crosshairs of a brutal civil war, ending up at refugee camps like this one in Iraq.
These people feel that maybe God has forgotten them, or maybe they've done something to make God angry for them to be in a camp like this.
And now, thousands and thousands of Christians there, forced to flee again, facing imminent execution by Islamic terrorists that have taken the country. And we just spoke with Reverend Franklin Graham about Christians and others under attack around the world. So, when you and I were in Erbil in December, it was so different than what it's like right now. And it shows the speed with which things can change, the speed with which this persecution of Christians is growing. That's what's so stunning to me. In just a few months, so much has changed just there.
Greta, it has, and it's intensifying. We're seeing now across Syria, and I'll get reports out of Syria where Christians, and also in Iraq, where Christians have been crucified, they've been beheaded. I've heard incidences where entire families have been buried alive because they refuse to convert to Islam. Greta, these people are dying for their faith. They believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son, who died for our sins, who was buried for our sins, who God raised to life. And they are being persecuted and they're being killed for their faith. And they're Muslim people too, who are fleeing because they do not want to live under this kind of regime. And this is Islam. And the people who follow the Quran gives them the basis for doing this.
Well, how come they're also persecuting Muslims as well? If the Muslims, if they all follow the Quran, how come some Muslims are getting persecuted as well?
Well, they're not being persecuted, they're just running. They just don't want to live under this. They don't want to see people beheaded. They don't want to see people crucified and buried alive. They don't want their children to see these kind of massacres and to grow up with this hatred. And so they're running because they don't want to live under it. And we've seen this happen in many places. Even when we were in the Nuba Mountains, a lot of those soldiers we were with, Greta, those were Muslims. And they were fighting President Bashir because they did not want to live under Sharia law, under Islamic law.
What is it that President Obama or politicians can do to try to stop this? Because this does seem, I mean, at least the numbers are growing.
Greta, they only respond to force. And I think the president is taking the right steps when he started bombing these militant groups. And I think we're going to have to continue to do that. And unfortunately, I think there's going to have to be more soldiers on the ground, not necessarily for combat, but to support the airstrikes and targeting these airstrikes. I think there's going to have to be a much larger U.S. involvement militarily.
Reverend Graham, nice to talk to you as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Greta.
And now to Nigeria. Boko Haram terrorists kidnapping dozens of boys and men in a raid on a remote village. The kidnapping come 4 months after Boko Haram kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls. Now, those schoolgirls are still missing. Boko Haram, like ISIS, is fighting to reinstate an Islamic caliphate in the religiously diverse Nigeria.